It's good to be here and to be with you. So as many or most of you know, I have a 10-year-old daughter. She adds a lot to my life, and in fact, I'm quite sure my life would be a lot more boring without her. One of the perks of having a child her age is keeping up with the latest trends in music, and with my child, music involves a lot of genres. Her playlists are rich and diverse, even going back to some of the music of her parents' eras. But in her era, one of the pop stars that gets a lot of airtime is Taylor Swift. I certainly wouldn't call myself a Swiftie, but I know her music. I mean, really, who doesn't at this point? She's become not only a well-known singer and songwriter, but also a pop icon. And she just released a new album called The Tortured Poets Department, if you haven't heard. On this new album, there's a song called Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? With Taylor's pop icon status and her reputation for writing songs about her very own life, a lot of people listen to her music and speculate on who in her life and what part of her life her songs are referencing. There's a lot of guesswork by a lot of different people about each song, who it's about, and what Taylor might be trying to convey. But with this song, I actually found an interview that Taylor did herself with Amazon Music, where she was giving insight into some of the songs from the Tortured Poets Department. One of those songs was Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? She herself told what the song was about and what part of her experience it came from. She said she wrote it sitting at her piano alone at a time when she was really upset about the things society does to artists and creatives. In other words, she wrote it from her experience as a young artist with a worldwide audience that's really interested in what she creates, loves her for it, and then judges her and tears her down. So this song is a reflection of the kind of fickle experience the world offers to even the most celebrated pop stars. The title describes her feelings as being so small, even as one of the biggest celebrities in the world. So what does Taylor Swift and her newly released album and this song, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, have to do with our passage from the letter to the Ephesians today? I think there are some commonalities, so go with me here as we unpack it. Let's first consider a bit what the world was like when this letter was written. It's written to a Christian community made up of Jewish and Gentile Christians. Scholars believe this letter was circulating among these Christian groups between the years of 60 and 90. Paul's mission had been years prior at this point, and he had subsequently been martyred. Not only had the apostle to the Gentiles been killed, the first Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire had ensued, and the Second Temple had been destroyed after the Romans reclaimed Jerusalem in the fight. Are you getting the picture here? This was not an easy time for these Christians. Indeed, as second-generation Christians who were oppressed and marginalized, who knew of apostles being arrested and martyred, they must have been in a place of great doubt. Who were they to believe in anything or anyone bigger than the Roman Empire and the culture it dominated? Who were they to believe they could make a difference? How could the church even survive in these circumstances? Everywhere they looked, it seemed as though they were losing ground in their faith journey. They were living in a tough time. They had believed, but were likely feeling small and insecure in their place and time when it seemed as though the power was not with God, but with the empire. Truly, they were questioning, who are we, and who is this God in which we have said we believed? Who could possibly be afraid of little old powerless me in a world dominated by the Roman Empire? They may have felt a bit like Taylor Swift in her song, small in number and up against a majority and suffering from the fickleness of the material world. But this letter is much more than a pop song lamenting or bemoaning that experience. Some scholars classify this letter as a sermon to this small group of Christians trying to keep their faith. However, as I have studied and contemplated the letter, I've sort of changed my view of it. I've come to see it as a love letter. I don't mean a kind of romantic love letter. I'm talking about a letter trying to convey a different kind of world, the true world where God's power is alive and well, and it is a power that's fueled by love rather than domination. The author of the letter seemed to know that first and foremost, a life rooted in the knowledge of a love and our belovedness is a life that we can sustainably live in this world. This kind of knowing fosters a belonging that then inspires our purpose. So come with me in considering this a love letter that's meant to encourage its audience in such a way that there is a renewed belief and purpose in their lives. Let us read it for ourselves like that too. Just like the original audience for which it was written, you too may be feeling like little old me in a world where there is much to bemoan and belittle. But that is really not the reality that captures our hearts as Christians. What captures our hearts is the reality that love is at the heart of who we are and whose we are, which is the very reason I believe the prayer in the letter to the Ephesians is asking or imploring that we and they know this love. I want to pause here and acknowledge that there are varying degrees of knowing. A simple or just surface reading of this prayer for those of us feeling small and doubting our place in the world, questioning our faith, or wondering how and if God is in control and how and if we belong to anything bigger than the culture and times in which we live. This kind of surface reading may leave us flat rather than deepened in the way I believe the author is trying to move us. The love the author is describing is complex. It's not simple. The very words that this prayer is using to describe God's love points to the complexity of it. Breadth, width, depth, height. These words are an attempt to describe something that is really incomprehensible. It is mysterious and deep beyond what we can fathom, but yet this prayer is calling us to try. I've come to see the prayer as addressed to an audience who's in a liminal space between what I call felt sense and felt knowledge of God's love. So what does this mean? Well, felt sense is a phrase that Eugene Grenlin used back in the 1970s to try to describe our first understanding of something that he called the fuzzy dimension of knowing. When we have a felt sense, we really can't describe what we are experiencing with words, but there's a bodily awareness. It is a knowing in both body and mind before they're split apart. It is a knowing that's anchored in the body, and what comes forth is not solely a product of the mind, but of a mind in a living, sensing body. For example, this felt sense may very well be what you experienced when you first met the love of your life, or you first walked into a place that you knew would be your home. I would say it's part of the grace that gives us the courage to first say yes to what Grenlin calls these vague, fuzzy feelings that are rooted in a knowledge that we have yet to live into. And over time, once we begin living into that first sense, our minds take over and what it and the body both knew, and we find ourselves beginning to doubt and to question our original sense of something. Again, I think that's where the recipients of this letter were. I think they were in a place between the felt sense of God's love and power, that love and power at work in them and in the world, and the felt knowledge of it. And maybe, just maybe, that's where some of us are today. After all, Robbie's been preaching the last few weeks on this theme of deep and wide, and he's reminded us that deep calls unto deep, and that this is the very place of belonging or home, this life of authenticity and grace that is both humbling and strengthening. He has reminded us of the complexities of our lives, all the things our world's made up of, the demands, the distractions, the brokenness, the beauty. He's encouraged us to seek a place of depth that transcends it all. I want to add to that this morning an encouragement that I see here in this prayer. And that is for us to seek and ask for a felt knowledge of the love from which we were created and for which we were created. Indeed, our purpose and our action in this world comes from this. and it is through this felt knowledge that we will be sustained to live out our purpose. So what is this shift from a felt sense to what I'm calling a felt knowledge? It's a process that leads to what Eugene Grinling calls receiving. It's the staying with and the going deeper into a felt sense until a release into the mysterious place of meaning emerges. This is an uncomfortable place to go, because even with the original felt sense of love and belonging, we've been conditioned to separate body and mind, and frankly, since the Enlightenment, we've valued the singularity of the mind over and above the communion of body, mind, and spirit. This movement that I believe this prayer is asking for is that of going to a state of being where we know in mind, body, and spirit the expansive love of God that is the very pulse of not only our lives, but of all of creation. Let me underscore the challenge of this for us. We live in a place and time that values the mind and our understanding of concepts. We're intelligent people. We can name our feelings and many of our experiences. We know things about ourselves and about God, and we can articulate our complex feelings even. If we stay there, though, in that plane of our experience, we'll look around and our thoughts about the state of the world, the state of our country, the state of the church, the state of our own lives, and we will begin to doubt. This is where our minds alone take us. Indeed, we're not that different from this group to whom the letter of the Ephesians is addressed. Pure rationality had taken over and had quieted the felt sense that first called them to the love of God through Christ. This letter, and specifically the prayer that we read today, is calling us deeper. We're called to the depths under those thoughts and feelings, to a place of mystery. And we're asked to stay there and wait until we're filled with something more true. A presence that the letter calls the fullness of God. It's something that's given to us, that we receive, and it involves grace. Again, I believe this prayer in the letter to the Ephesians is praying for this shift, for this grace to come, and for people who began with a felt sense to now have a felt knowledge. Psychologist Joseph Royce calls this existential validation and says it grounds all spiritual truths. Theologian Paul Tillich beautifully describes how such spiritual truths come through being struck by grace. He says, "Do you know what it means to be struck by grace? We cannot transform our lives unless we allow them to be transformed by a stroke of grace. It happens or it doesn't happen, and certainly it doesn't happen if we try to will it or force it upon ourselves, just as it shall not happen as long as we think in our self-complacency that we have no need of it. Grace strikes when we are in great pain and restlessness. It strikes when year after year the longed-for perfection of life does not appear, when despair destroys all joy and courage. Sometimes at that moment, a shaft of life breaks into our darkness, and it is as though a voice is saying, 'You are accepted. You are accepted. Accepted by that which is greater than you. Don't try to do anything. Don't try to perform anything. Don't intend anything. Simply accept the fact that you are accepted.' If that happens to us, we experience grace. Sometimes it happens when we receive the power to say yes to ourselves. This peace enters into us and makes us whole. Doubt disappears, and our self is reunited within itself, mind, body, and spirit. Then we can say, grace has come upon us. So this movement from a felt sense to a felt knowledge is a gift, but it is a gift that we must ask for, which is what this prayer is doing. We must first get the felt sense, and then we must stick with it and go deeper into the mystery of our lives, into the mystery of the love that created us and that strengthens us. Eugene Ginlin gives us some steps to know how to do this. The first one is we must clear a space. Robbie has mentioned the need to sit still or get still several times throughout this sermon series about going deeper. I know this is not an easy message to hear in a culture where busyness and productivity are highly valued and even demanded, but it is one of the paradoxes of our faith. This prayer about going deeper from sensing to knowing precedes the part of the letter that goes into how to be in relationship with each other. I think the focus on first getting rooted in who we are and whose we are, moving much deeper into the great mystery of the love that created and sustains us, is quite intentional. And I think it's a word for us today. So we must first clear some space in our lives and get in touch with the felt sense that first called us to God's love. When we sit in the presence of it, sit with the mystery of it, ask questions of it, listen for what comes up and get in touch with it, this sitting is not easy, and it's certainly not a practice that our culture fosters. But yet somehow, if we have the desire and the discipline to do it, to stick with it, something begins to shift in ways that we can't fully understand or articulate. Things begin to release within us, and we are transformed by it. This is moving into the fullness of God. This is becoming more whole. This is what allows us to keep going, to keep saying yes to faith and belief, despite living in a fickle world where we can easily feel so small and so powerless. This prayer reminds us that we're not. We have a power in us and among us that is greater than anything our culture or any world empire has. It's hard to remember that truth sometimes. Yes, we have a lot to bemoan, and even our biggest pop stars and cultural icons, even Taylor Swift, suffers from the tugs and pulls, the highs and lows of living in this world. All of us feel small and powerless at times in this life. Thankfully, we have more than just a song. We have an entire book of stories, poems, and prayers that acknowledge the realities of our lives and remind us of who we are and whose we are. It gives us hope and encourages us to go deeper into the mystery of the power of the love we first felt and that we are seeking to know more and more and to be more and more. Let us follow the thread of this prayer and ask for this felt sense to become felt knowledge. Let us not be scared of the quiet of the deep, the stillness of the mystery. Let us take time apart and let it fill us and transform us and strengthen us in our lives and our relationships and allow us to keep saying yes to a love so great. Amen.